So you mentioned leakage. How easy is it for these non-state actors to actually acquire nuclear weapons?
Well, we hope it's very hard. The evidence suggests that it is quite hard. First of all, you can't enrich uranium in a cave. You need an actual industrial infrastructure of some sort. Even if you can conceal that from the international community, as the North Koreans did and as the Iranians did to a point, you need to have a state structure or at least a large industrial base to do this. It's not the kind of thing that you can do, in a back room or like I say, in a cave, which is good news. So the real focus is on fissile material, production of fissile material, which is hard. Controlling that material once it's created is important because theoretically, at least, fashioning a bomb from that fissile material is fairly straightforward. But again, fairly straightforward is a pretty broad range of things, and it turns out that it's still quite hard to assemble a functioning nuclear device, one that would behave as a thermonuclear device as opposed to a dirty bomb, where you're just taking fissile material and packing it together with explosive material and spreading radiation around a zone, an area. That last component, the creation of a dirty bomb, is probably far more practical for a non-state actor or terrorist group than creating a bomb from scratch or even building one once you acquire the fissile material. But it's still quite hard, and the danger, I think, for many of these groups is that the moment they start sniffing around for these fissile material, they alert lots of different people who are looking for people looking for the material. They attract a lot of attention. We know that Al-Qaeda has attempted to purchase this, but has been at least badly burned at least one time, where they were basically purchased useless, non-weapons grade material, and they paid a ridiculous sum of money for basically nuclear junk. And I think for many of these groups, they've concluded that it's not worth the trouble. They can terrorize people with something far less than the trouble that is involved in acquiring this material. But I think the bottom line is we should continue to make it hard for them to acquire this material by controlling the production of fissile material and by reducing it and making it harder to acquire it on the international market.
Thank you. I do have a couple more questions.
Sure.
As the world watches Iran and North Korea, what course of action does Cato promote to be more appropriate for handling nuclear armament?
I think when we look at both of these questions, I think these countries are different for different reasons, but as a general rule, a general proposition, we ask why is it that these two countries want to have nuclear weapons when most other countries don't. Most other countries have chosen not to. There was a time back in the early 1960s, for example, when many people were convinced that many, many, many countries would acquire nuclear weapons, and in fact, only 9 have them, counting North Korea as being the 9th country with nuclear weapons. First of all, in the case of North Korea, it appears that they have wanted this device and the technology behind it to attract the attention of the world community. They rattle the saber, and occasionally they are rewarded with a relaxation of sanctions or some kind of food assistance or other financial assistance to help what is a desperately poor country. On the other hand, we have to recognize there's been a constant state of war on the Korean Peninsula. Basically, the U.S. military has been stationed there since, of course, the start of the Korean War in 1950. And I think that they are looking for leverage to resolve that crisis in one way or another. The irony, of course, is that many South Koreans, what they want more than anything is the eventual reunification of the peninsula and to reduce the tensions to the point where that state of war would ultimately end. Tragically, I think, both through a combination of just the nature of the regime in North Korea, but also because of the security situation, we're probably farther away from reunification than we have been in recent times. And I think what a lot of our work focuses on that, about the aspirations of the Korean people, both north and south of the DMZ, to reunify and what that would mean, and try to move the conversation away from nuclear weapons per se and more about resolving this persistent tension between the two Koreas. In the case of Iran, I think the situation is slightly different. I do think there are some people who are convinced that Iran with nuclear weapons would behave very, very differently from every other nuclear weapon state, which is to say they would actually use them. Every other nuclear weapon state, with the exception of the United States in the context of World War II, every other nuclear weapon state has not used those weapons and has in fact explicitly stated that the purpose of those weapons is purely for deterrence, not for strike. I think there are some people who are concerned that Iran would behave differently, that they would act far less rationally with nuclear weapons. And we have looked at that question pretty carefully, and we've concluded that we think that they would behave like other nuclear weapon states. They would not use these weapons. They would want them to deter the United States and not to precipitate a conflict, which after all would result in their complete and utter annihilation, not just from the United States, but from other nuclear weapon states, including Israel, which have nuclear weapons. The question then is, how do you convince the Iranians that a nuclear weapon is not in their best interest? And I think that's a challenge, but I think it can be done. I think it starts with building some kind of confidence that we, the United States, or other countries are not intent upon overthrowing their government, which has been effectively our policy for many years, but also some assurances from the Iranians that they are willing to be a responsible member of the international community, to not continue to sponsor terrorism and not to do other things that they've been doing over the last few years. Because after all, if they were more confident in the security of their government and the regime from a nuclear deterrent, the argument goes they would become more adventurous in the other ways, not necessarily using nuclear weapons, but using them as a shield to accelerate or expand their activities in other areas. And that's where we focus most of our work and our attention, is on trying to reduce the tension between the two countries, but also explore how they are likely to behave if they had a nuclear weapon. That's where most of our work is.
Wow. So I have one final question. I just would like to know, because we are in an election year, and sometimes the foreign policy and the national security issues don't rate as high as, you know, healthcare
right.
and education and like the economy right
yes.
now because of how things are.
Yes.
But what specifically what should we be looking for from our candidates on the issues of national security, homeland security, or foreign policy in regards to nuclear arms?
Again, another great question. You're right. The polls all show that the American people are much more concerned about the economy right now and jobs than foreign policy and military issues that are way down the list, which is somewhat different, of course, from the elections in 2004, 6, and 8, where we had, you know, wars going on, and there was they were not the most important issue, but they were important in those elections. So I think this election is different. But having said that, we do spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year on our military. It's not the cause of our fiscal problems, but it doesn't help. And I think there's been greater scrutiny on the size of the budget and whether or not we can achieve greater levels of security by spending less on the military. A related concern is about the strength of our economy. How does that convey our strength as a nation globally, as our ability to remain the global leader? That has been undermined a little bit by our fiscal problems over the last 3 or 4 years. In terms of nuclear weapons, I think that we continue to maintain a large arsenal, one of the largest, second largest in the world, and again, the U.S. and Russian arsenals are comparable, not exactly the same, but comparable. And I think that more people should at least be aware of how large our arsenal is relative to other countries, and ask the question whether or not it's truly necessary, given what other countries have concluded is necessary for their own deterrent. And that's why I think we can have a smaller force. But the last question is really this question about Iran and does a policy of using military force to halt nuclear proliferation or the proliferation of other weapons, does that actually pay off in the long term? And I think that the experience in Iraq in particular has kind of reminded people that these wars are quite costly, and they're not nearly as clean or easy as many of the advocates may say. And so we try to focus, and I think it would be good if other Americans would focus on just to the extent that they allow foreign policy to creep into their considerations of the different candidates, ask the question, what is the object of a policy of, for example, military confrontation, and is it likely to deliver the stated objectives in the way that the advocate says? And my experience is that most of the time the answer is no.
Well, we'll certainly be watching for that. As you may know, the recent anniversary of the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were, I think, last week, and the issue and the topic is so relevant right now. And I just want to thank you so much for giving us a little bit more insight on this topic, and we look forward to hearing you at our event on September 11th.
And I look forward to being there. Thanks so much for coming to Cato. Thanks.